From the beginning, Center for Human Services' mission has always been to change lives and build better futures. This is what our organization has lived and breathed every day. In 1970, Headrest opened with 1 paid staff member and 9 volunteers. Within 1 year, there were 3 paid staff members, 20 volunteers, and a 24-hour hotline was introduced. An ombudsman program started in schools as a precursor to what is now the Student Assistance Program. A juvenile diversion program began with counselors placed at the police station and juvenile hall. Next, Hutton House began in 1976, and by the end of the decade, the budget was already $1 million. Let's take a trip down memory lane and give you the skinny on who we were in the 1970s.
It was a loosely put together band of people from all walks of life who wanted to make a difference in some way. Headrest in the 1970s was an effort to bring some remedy to the problem of street drug overdose. The mental health services in the county hadn't quite gotten off the ground yet. We were really the first 24/7 crisis line in Stanislaus County in the early 70s and really filled a void in terms of what was needed for folks who were struggling. The Ombudsman program came a little later. I think in 1974, Headrest actually began receiving its first grants. To think where it started and where it's ended up, I feel very proud to have had anything at all to do with the Center for Human Services.
The 80s were good to us as we grew and were managing a budget of $2 million and 55 employees. It was in 1984 that we became Center for Human Services. We created a new logo, the Student Assistance Program was officially created, and our long-running fundraiser, Edible Extravaganza, had its first year. In addition, our community counseling clinic opened, and Hutton House moved to their present-day home, which was custom-built for their needs. By the end of the 80s, we had served over 4,000 individuals. And since we're talking about the 80s, let's share some truly fresh times.
Volunteers are really the heart of Hutton House. Probably about half my staff members at some point in time were volunteers, and that was very much tone that was set in the 80s, and we've carried through, and it's been a very smart move on our part. Some of the challenges going into working in that kind of program, we're just working with the family as a unit. Often you'll find that the child wants help or support, or the parent wants help or support. Not often do they always want help or support at the same time. Some of the biggest successes was just referring them on to the appropriate services for longer term support. One of the most critical and important moments in my life at Hutton House was a youth and family had received our services, and when they left, I was happy to see them go home. And they walked up to the car and I watched them leave, and all of a sudden this 17-year-old boy runs back up to the house, knocks on the door and said, "What'd you forget?" He said, "I forgot to hug you." And so he hugged me, and it was like, it was payoff for the time and energy that goes into doing that kind of work. I'm excited for the next few years. We're looking at some growth and development, and we're going to do some new things in the coming years, so it's pretty exciting.
Let's fast track to the 90s. We loved our friends and, well, Center for Human Services kept growing. It was during this time that we became a United Way member organization, and Friday Night Live was started in high schools countywide. We received an Outstanding Service Agency Award, and community counseling expanded into schools throughout the county. We started financially managing Ceres Partnership Family Resource Center, and the LGBTQ support group became a reality. Center for Human Services assisted with families displaced by the floods, and we were named Nonprofit Agency of the Year by Modesto Chamber of Commerce. By the end of the decade, our budget was $4.6 million, and we were serving an average of 10,000 individuals a year. Some of the achievements of the 1990s were all that and a bag of chips. Let's check it out.
One of the biggest things I remember is this crazy idea called Edible Extravaganza. I have very fond memories of many fun evenings at Edible. just getting to meet people and getting to see people learn more about our programs. I just remember that was a seminal event at the time that I was on the board there. I remember Friday Night Live. It took off quite quickly. It was exciting to see how it interacted with the community. It was exciting to see how the community responded to it. Staffing was a constant challenge. Getting good people and keeping them. There are facilities now that we only dreamed of having. I look at the offices. We used to live in a really small office, and they've gone through a couple different moves in a much bigger facility now. I see no reason why the Center for Human Services couldn't start planning now for their 100th, and just keep doing what we do.
The clock struck midnight and we all left the 20th century behind. It was now that Center for Human Services began offering more programs such as juvenile justice services, mental health counseling, expanded school-based services, family resource centers, and substance abuse diversion programs. The Pathways program was created to house young adults ages 18 to 24. The Children First Distinguished Leadership Fundraiser began, and several other fundraisers were held, including Family Magic and All That Jazz. Internally, a leadership group was established and several employee committees were formed. Center for Human Services continued to grow in staff, office space, budget, and diversity of services. So many people have been helped and impacted by our presence in the community. Let's take a final look before bringing you into the present day.
In the early 2000s, I would say the mission was, the main goal was to serve and help families. When I first started, I think it was actually my first student I worked with, a little girl, an elementary school student who was mute. She did not speak. And I think it was towards the end of our session, she actually gave me a hug. So for me, that was huge for her. It's just amazing to me, actually, that the Center for Human Services has been around for so long, and it's grown, and it's just made so many strides.
50 years later, with over 250 people in our staff, at least 100 volunteers, a budget of over $12 million, and serving over 20,000 individuals a year, Center for Human Services continues to provide helpful programs to the youth and families of Stanislaus County. Center for Human Services has a long, deep history, and we respond to the needs of our community. Thank you for all of your support every step of the way. Looking forward to the next 50 years.